She waited 5 days at the station until the child in boots said, "Will you marry my papa instead?" Silver Point, Colorado Territory, spring of 1875. The wind swept down from the snow-capped peaks, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of storms. Margaret Sullivan stood on the warped wooden platform of the town's single railway station, her carpetbag at her feet, her hope wearing thinner than the soles of her worn boots. 5 days. 5 long days of watching trains arrive and depart, of scanning every face that stepped onto the platform, of clutching the letter that had brought her here from Boston. The letter promised a new life, a husband, a home in the Colorado Territory. Edgar Whitman, it was signed, a rancher in need of a wife. "You're telling me there's no Edgar Whitman in this town?" Margaret asked the station master for the 12th time. The weathered old man scratched his graying beard, his eyes kind but tired. "Miss, I've lived in Silver Point for 23 years, built half the buildings with these hands. I know every soul within 50 miles. There ain't no Edgar Whitman, never has been." Margaret's fingers trembled as she unfolded the letter again. The ink looked real. The agency stamp at the bottom appeared genuine. But like morning mist, her dreams were evaporating in the harsh mountain air. "Some of the local boys been pulling pranks," the station master continued gently. "Fake bride letters. Happened twice last winter. Those girls had sense enough to catch the next train back east. But Margaret had sold everything to get here. Her mother's china, her father's watch, even her wedding dress from a marriage that never happened. There was nothing to go back to in Boston except shame and an empty room above Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. She pulled her shawl tighter against the wind and walked to the bench outside the station. The same bench where she'd spent 4 nights, using her bag as a pillow, waking every few hours when the mountain cold seeped through her bones. The townspeople had been kind at first, offering biscuits, spare blankets, concerned glances. But kindness turned to pity, and pity to whispered conversations that stopped when she walked by. She'd heard the fragments. "Poor thing. 3rd one this year. When will they learn?" On the 5th afternoon, as Margaret sat watching the mountains paint themselves gold in the setting sun, she felt a small tug at her skirt. She looked down to see a little girl, perhaps 6 years old, with tangled brown hair and boots so large they must have belonged to a grown man. The child's dress was patched but clean, her face smudged with dirt, but her eyes bright as mountain stars. She studied Margaret with the serious expression children wear when the world has taught them to be careful. "Are you the lady who got left?" the girl asked, her voice small but clear. Margaret's throat tightened. "I suppose I am." The child nodded solemnly. "My name's Lucy. Papa says men who lie to ladies deserve a good thrashing." Despite everything, Margaret almost smiled. "Your papa sounds like a wise man." Lucy tilted her head, considering. "He's sad mostly, but he's good at fixing broken things." She paused, then added with startling directness, "Will you marry my papa instead?" Margaret's breath caught. What? He needs someone. I think you need someone too. And you look like you could fix broken things as well." Before Margaret could respond, Lucy had grabbed her hand with surprising strength. "Come on, I can't walk to town alone, and Papa will worry if I'm late." Margaret looked down at the small hand wrapped around hers, warm despite the mountain chill. After 5 days of rejection, of being unwanted and forgotten, a child's simple trust felt like salvation itself. She picked up her bag and followed. The walk to the Carter Ranch took nearly an hour, winding through scrub oak and scattered pine, the path more suggestion than road. Lucy chattered the entire way, her 2 large boots scuffing against stones, her small hand never letting go of Margaret's. "Papa doesn't talk much since Mama went to heaven," Lucy explained matter-of-factly, "but he listens real good, and he makes the best flapjacks in all of Colorado Territory, though don't tell Mrs. Henley at the general store I said so." Margaret found herself smiling despite the uncertainty gnawing at her stomach. "How long has it been since your mama passed?" 2 winters ago. I was real little then, but I remember her singing. Papa doesn't sing anymore." Lucy kicked a pebble ahead of them. "Maybe you could teach him again." The innocence of it nearly broke Margaret's heart. This child, barely 6 years old, trying to heal her father's wounds by bringing home a stranger from a train station. What kind of man raised such a trusting soul? And what kind of desperation had driven that soul to seek help from someone she'd never met? Lucy, Margaret said carefully, your papa might not be pleased that you brought me home. He might not want a wife. Lucy looked up at her with those bright, serious eyes. He needs one, though. He gets that look sometimes, like he's lost something and can't remember where he put it. And he talks to Mama's picture when he thinks I'm sleeping. The ranch appeared as they crested a small hill. It was modest but well-maintained. A two-story house with a wraparound porch, a red barn that had seen better days but still stood proud, and corrals that held a few horses and cattle. Smoke curled from the chimney and warm light glowed in the windows, painting golden rectangles on the dusty ground. A man emerged from the barn as they approached, wiping his hands on a rag. Even in the fading light, Margaret could see he was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair slightly too long, his face shadowed by a day's worth of stubble. He moved with the easy grace of someone comfortable with physical work, but there was something guarded in his posture. "Lucy May Carter," he called, his voice carrying a note of relief mixed with exasperation. "You know better than to wander off without telling me where you're going." "I didn't wander, Papa. I went to fetch someone." Lucy dropped Margaret's hand and ran to her father. "This is Margaret. She was waiting at the station for a man who doesn't exist, and I thought maybe she could wait here instead." The man's eyes found Margaret's, and she felt the weight of his assessment. His gaze was neither cruel nor kind, simply measuring. He had the weathered look of someone who spent his days outdoors, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into sun and wind. But those eyes held a depth of sadness that matched the one Margaret had been carrying in her own chest. "Samuel Carter," he said finally, touching the brim of his hat, "and I'm going to have words with my daughter about bringing strangers home." "I'm Margaret Sullivan," she replied, clutching her carpet bag tighter, "and you don't need to worry about words. I can find my way back to town." "In the dark? Through canyon country?" Samuel's voice carried a practical concern rather than invitation. "That's not safe, especially for someone who doesn't know the territory." Lucy looked between them, her small face creased with worry. "Papa, she's been sleeping on that bench for 5 days. 5 whole days. And her man never came because he was never real." Something shifted in Samuel's expression. "5 days?" Margaret's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "Yes, I know how it sounds. I know how it looks. But I sold everything I had to get here, and She took a breath, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I had nowhere else to go." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from Margaret to Lucy and back again. The child watched him with the intensity of someone who understood more about adult pain than she should. "Lucy," he said finally, "go wash up for supper. We'll have a guest tonight." "Just tonight?" Lucy asked, her disappointment clear. "We'll see." Samuel's voice was gentler now. "Go on." Lucy hesitated, then stood on her tiptoes to whisper something in her father's ear. Margaret caught only fragments. "Lonely. And kind eyes. And please, Papa." Samuel's jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded. Lucy beamed and skipped toward the house, calling over her shoulder. "Margaret, you'll love Papa's beef stew. He makes it with potatoes and carrots and this secret spice that—" "Lucy," Samuel warned, and she giggled before disappearing through the front door. Left alone with him, Margaret felt the full awkwardness of her situation settle around her like a heavy cloak. Here she stood on a stranger's property, brought by his 6-year-old daughter, with nothing but a carpet bag and a heart full of foolish dreams. "Mr. Carter," she began, "I want you to know that I don't expect anything from you. Your daughter was kind to me when no one else was, but I understand that this is irregular." "Irregular," he repeated, and there might have been the ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "That's one word for it." He studied her face in the lamplight spilling from the house. What kind of man promises to marry a woman and then doesn't exist? "A cruel one," Margaret said simply. "Or perhaps just a boy with too much time and too little conscience." Samuel nodded slowly. "You have family back east?" "No one who would claim me now." The admission came out more bitter than she'd intended. "And no money for a return ticket?" It wasn't a question, but Margaret answered anyway. "No." Samuel was quiet again, and Margaret could almost see him weighing options, calculating costs, measuring his daughter's pleading against his own desire for solitude. "I can work," she said quickly. "I kept house for my aunt in Boston for 3 years. I can cook, clean, mend clothes. I know you don't need a wife, but perhaps you could use hired help. Just until I can earn enough to—" "Miss Sullivan," his voice stopped her rambling. "My daughter brought you here because she has a good heart and because she sees things I sometimes miss." He glanced toward the house where Lucy's silhouette could be seen moving past the kitchen window. "She's been trying to take care of me since her mother died, and that's not a burden any child should carry." Margaret waited, not daring to hope. "You can stay the night," Samuel said. "We'll talk more in the morning about what comes next." Relief flooded through her so suddenly she almost stumbled. "Thank you. I promise I won't be any trouble." Samuel Carter looked at her with those sad, careful eyes. "Miss Sullivan, in my experience, trouble comes whether we invite it or not. The question is whether it's the kind worth having." As if summoned by his words, Lucy's voice carried through the open door. "Papa! Margaret! Supper's getting cold." Samuel gestured toward the house. "Shall we?" Margaret picked up her bag and followed him toward the warm light and the scent of beef stew, toward the possibility that maybe, just maybe, her long wait was finally over. Inside, the house was simple but comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with handmade furniture arranged around it. The kitchen was small but efficient, with a table that seated four and shelves lined with blue and white dishes. Lucy had already ladled stew into 3 bowls and was pouring milk from a pitcher. She looked up as they entered, her face bright with satisfaction. "I set a place for Margaret right between us," she announced. "That way she won't feel like a stranger." Samuel caught Margaret's eye over his daughter's head, and for just a moment she saw something softer in his expression. Not welcome, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of possibility. As they sat down to eat, Margaret realized that for the first time in 5 days, she wasn't alone. And for the first time in months, maybe years, she wasn't waiting for someone else to decide her fate. She was finally tentatively home. Margaret woke before dawn to the sound of roosters and the distant lowing of cattle. The small room Samuel had given her was sparse but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. She'd slept better than she had in days, finally warm and safe beneath a real roof. She dressed quickly in her brown traveling dress, the only clean one she had left, and made her way to the kitchen. She could hear movement in the barn already. Samuel was an early riser, it seemed. Lucy was still asleep, her small form curled under quilts in the room next to Margaret's. Margaret found coffee beans in a tin canister and set about brewing a pot, moving quietly so as not to wake the child. She was searching for eggs when she heard boots on the porch. Samuel entered, carrying a pail of fresh milk, his dark hair still damp from washing at the pump. He stopped short when he saw her at the stove. "You're up early," he observed, his voice neutral. "I'm used to early mornings. In Boston, I help my aunt with her boarding house. Breakfast for 12 people doesn't cook itself." Margaret poured him a cup of coffee, noting the way his shoulders relaxed slightly as the aroma reached him. "Thank you." He accepted the cup, their fingers brushing briefly. "About last night—" "Mr. Carter," Margaret interrupted gently, "you don't owe me explanations. You gave me shelter when I needed it most. That's more kindness than I've received in months." Samuel studied her face over his coffee cup. "Lucy gets attached quickly. Her mother used to say she collected wounded birds and lost causes. And you're worried I'm both. I'm worried she'll expect you to stay permanently when I can't offer that." Margaret felt the sting but kept her expression calm. "I understand. I'll make sure she knows I'm only here temporarily." "It's not that I don't—" Samuel began, then stopped himself. "It's complicated." Before Margaret could respond, Lucy's voice carried from her bedroom. "Papa, I don't feel good." Both adults moved toward the sound immediately. They found Lucy sitting up in bed, her face flushed and her small body shivering despite the warm morning. Margaret pressed her hand to the child's forehead. "She's burning up." Samuel's face went pale. "Lucy, sweetheart, where does it hurt?" "My throat," Lucy whispered, her voice hoarse. "And I'm cold but hot at the same time." Margaret had seen this before during her years helping her aunt. It looks like fever. Has she been around anyone sick recently? Mrs. Henderson's grandson was poorly last week when we went to town for supplies. Samuel's voice was tight with worry. Damn it, I should have kept her away from the store. This isn't your fault, Margaret said firmly. Children get sick. It's what they do. She turned to Lucy. Have you been drinking water, sweetheart? Lucy shook her head weakly. Margaret looked at Samuel. We need to keep her drinking fluids and bring the fever down. Do you have willow bark or any kind of fever reducer? There might be some laudanum. No. Margaret's voice was sharp. That's too strong for a child. We need something gentler. She thought for a moment. Cool cloths, plenty of water, and if you have any mint or chamomile, we can make tea. Samuel nodded, some of the panic leaving his eyes now that there was a plan. I'll get the herbs from Sarah's garden. She always kept medicinals. As he left, Margaret sat on the edge of Lucy's bed. How are you feeling, little one? Scared, Lucy admitted in a small voice. When Mama got sick, she went to heaven. Am I going to heaven too? Margaret's heart clenched. Oh, sweetheart, no. This is just a fever. Lots of children get fevers and get better. You're going to be fine. Promise? Margaret hesitated. She'd learned not to make promises she couldn't keep, but looking at those frightened eyes, she found herself saying, I promise I'll take very good care of you until you feel better. How's that? Lucy nodded, seemingly satisfied with this compromise. Samuel returned with herbs and clean cloths. Together, they worked to make Lucy comfortable, Margaret brewing tea while Samuel bathed his daughter's face with cool water. There was something natural about working alongside him, their movements coordinated without discussion. You're good at this, Samuel observed as Margaret coaxed Lucy to drink small sips of chamomile tea. I helped nurse my aunt through pneumonia 2 winters ago, and there were always sick boarders at the house. Margaret adjusted Lucy's pillows. Children are remarkably resilient. She'll be better in a few days. Lucy dozed fitfully through the morning, waking periodically for water or tea. Margaret stayed close, reading to her from a collection of fairy tales she found on the bookshelf, while Samuel went about his ranch work but checked in frequently. Around midday, Dr. Henley arrived, a gruff man in his 60s who examined Lucy with gentle hands despite his brusque manner. It's just a cold-turned fever, he pronounced after his examination. Nothing that rest and fluids won't cure. You're doing everything right. He looked between Margaret and Samuel. Miss Sullivan, is it? Word travels fast in a small town. Margaret felt her cheeks warm. Yes, doctor. Town's buzzing about Samuel taking in a mail-order bride. I'm not, Margaret began, but Samuel interrupted. Miss Sullivan is helping care for Lucy, he said firmly. That's all anyone needs to know. Dr. Henley raised an eyebrow but didn't press. After he left, Margaret found herself alone with Samuel in the kitchen while Lucy napped. Thank you, she said quietly, for not letting him make assumptions. Samuel poured himself more coffee. This town has enough gossip without us feeding it. He paused. Though I should warn you, staying here even temporarily will generate talk. I'm used to being talked about. In Boston, I was the spinster who never married, then the desperate woman chasing after mail-order proposals. Margaret smiled wryly. At least here the gossip is about helping a sick child. Is that what you were in Boston? Desperate? The question was asked gently, but Margaret felt its weight. Practical, I thought. My aunt died and left me nothing. I had no family, no prospects, no way to support myself except by taking in washing or working in a factory. She met his eyes. A marriage proposal, even from a stranger, seemed like hope. Samuel was quiet for a moment. What did you do before your aunt died? I taught school for 2 years. Then I helped her with the boarding house when she got sick. Margaret traced patterns on the wooden table with her finger. I liked teaching. The children were bright, full of possibility. Why did you stop? The school board decided I was too old to be unmarried and still teaching their children. They said it set a bad example. The old hurt was still there, but duller now. I was 26. Samuel's expression darkened. Fools. The simple declaration, spoken with quiet conviction, made something warm bloom in Margaret's chest. When was the last time anyone had defended her without being asked? Lucy's voice drifted from her room. Margaret, can you read more stories? Of course, sweetheart. Margaret rose, then paused. Mr. Carter, Samuel, thank you for letting me help. It feels good to be useful. Something shifted in Samuel's expression, a crack in the careful walls he maintained. She hasn't let anyone else take care of her since Sarah died. She usually just wants me when she's sick. Maybe she knows I understand what it's like to need taking care of sometimes. Their eyes met and held for a moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Lucy called again, and the moment broke. Margaret spent the afternoon reading fairy tales and singing half-remembered lullabies while Lucy dozed. Samuel appeared periodically, bringing fresh water, checking the child's temperature, lingering longer than necessary to listen to Margaret's stories. As evening approached, Lucy's fever began to break. She managed to eat some broth and keep it down, and her eyes were clearer when she looked at Margaret. Are you staying tonight too? She asked hopefully. Margaret glanced at Samuel, who stood in the doorway. If your papa doesn't mind. Of course she's staying, Lucy said before her father could respond. She promised to take care of me until I'm better, and I'm not all the way better yet. Samuel's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. Well, if you promised. That night, after Lucy finally fell into restful sleep, Margaret and Samuel sat at the kitchen table sharing a quiet supper. The intimacy of it, the domestic routine they'd fallen into so naturally, both comforted and unsettled her. She's going to be fine, Margaret said, noting the worry lines that still creased Samuel's forehead. I know, it's just... He rubbed his face with both hands. When Sarah got sick, it started like this. A fever, nothing serious. Then it got worse and worse, and... He trailed off. This isn't that, Margaret said gently. Lucy is young and strong, and you're not facing this alone. Samuel looked at her sharply. Aren't I? The question hung between them, loaded with meaning. Margaret chose her words carefully. Not while I'm here. Samuel held her gaze for a long moment. And how long is that? Margaret felt her heart pick up speed. I don't know. As long as you'll let me, I suppose. Miss Sullivan, Margaret, I need you to understand something. I can't give you what you came to Colorado looking for. I can't be the husband you need. Can't promise you the life you deserve. What if I said I wasn't looking for promises anymore? Margaret asked quietly. What if I said I was just looking for a place to belong? Samuel was quiet for so long that Margaret wondered if she'd said too much, pushed too hard. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah used to say that some people come into your life when you need them most, even if you don't know you need them. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. Samuel's eyes were distant with memory. She'd probably like you. It wasn't a declaration of love or a promise of forever, but sitting in the lamplight of the kitchen, with Lucy's peaceful breathing drifting from the next room, it felt like enough. It felt like a beginning. Lucy's recovery took 4 days, and with each passing hour, Margaret found herself settling deeper into the rhythms of the Carter Ranch. She rose before dawn to start the coffee, helped Samuel with morning chores, tended to Lucy's needs, and gradually took over the household tasks that had been neglected since Sarah's death. The house began to show signs of a woman's touch again. Margaret swept corners that hadn't been cleaned in months, mended tiers and curtains, and organized the kitchen shelves with an efficiency that made Samuel pause in doorways to watch her work. She did it all quietly, without fanfare, as if these small acts of care were as natural as breathing. On the 3rd day of Lucy's illness, Margaret was hanging laundry when she heard voices from town. Mrs. Henderson and another woman were walking past the ranch boundary, their conversation carrying on the morning air. Staying there like she owns the place, Mrs. Henderson was saying. Poor Samuel doesn't know what hit him. Well, she can't stay forever, the other woman replied. Decent women don't live unmarried with widowers, no matter what the circumstances. Mark my words, she'll have her claws in him before the month is out. That's how these desperate Eastern women operate. Margaret's hands stilled on the clothesline. She'd expected gossip, but the casual cruelty still stung. She was pinning up one of Lucy's nightgowns when Samuel's voice came from behind her. Don't listen to them. She turned to find him standing a few feet away, a feed bucket in his hand. His jaw was tight, his eyes hard. Hard not to when they're not exactly whispering, Margaret replied, forcing her voice to stay level. Helen Henderson has been trying to marry me off to her niece since Sarah died. She sees you as competition. Am I? The question slipped out before Margaret could stop it. Samuel's expression grew carefully neutral. You're a woman helping care for my sick daughter. Nothing more, nothing less. It should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like a door closing. That afternoon, Lucy was finally well enough to sit up and eat solid food. Margaret brought her a bowl of soup and found the child unusually quiet. What's wrong, sweetheart? I heard the ladies talking, Lucy said in a small voice. They said mean things about you. Margaret's heart sank. What did they say? That you're trying to trick Papa into marrying you, and that decent ladies don't live with men they're not married to. Lucy looked up with worried eyes. Are you not decent? Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes people say things when they don't understand a situation. Lucy, I'm here to help take care of you while you're sick. That's all. But what happens when I'm better? It was the question Margaret had been dreading. I don't know, little one. I don't want you to go, Lucy said, her lower lip trembling. You make Papa smile again, and you sing pretty songs, and you know all the best stories. Your Papa smiled before I came here? Not the same way. Not the way he used to smile at Mama. The observation was too perceptive for a 6-year-old, and it made Margaret's chest tight with something she couldn't name. By the 5th day, Lucy was well enough to venture outside. Margaret watched from the kitchen window as the child ran to the chicken coop, Samuel following at a careful distance. The fever had broken completely, leaving Lucy pale but energetic, chattering to the chickens about everything that had happened while she was sick. Margaret was kneading bread when Samuel came inside, stomping mud from his boots. She's back to her old self, he observed, accepting the coffee cup Margaret offered him. Children recover quickly when they're loved and well cared for. Samuel leaned against the kitchen counter, studying her face. You're good with her. She's easy to love. Is she? The question was quiet, thoughtful. Most people find her a lot. She talks constantly, asks too many questions, has opinions about everything. Margaret smiled. She reminds me of myself at that age. My aunt used to say I could talk the paint off a barn door. What happened to that little girl? The question caught Margaret off guard. Life, I suppose, loss, learning that the world doesn't always want to hear what you have to say. Samuel was quiet for a moment. Sarah used to say that the worst tragedy wasn't losing your voice, but forgetting you ever had one. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Lucy through the window as she gathered eggs with intense concentration. Margaret, Samuel began, then stopped himself. What? He seemed to be wrestling with something. The town will keep talking? It might get worse before it gets better. I know. You could find work in Denver or Colorado Springs, bigger towns, more opportunities for a woman with your education. Margaret's hand stilled on the bread dough. Is that what you want? For me to leave? Samuel didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. I see, Margaret said quietly, turning back to her kneading with more force than necessary. It's not about what I want, Samuel said finally. It's about what's right, what's fair to you. Don't I get to decide what's fair to me? Do you? Or are you just grateful for any shelter, any kindness, after what happened at the station? The accusation hit like a physical blow. Margaret set down the dough and turned to face him fully. That's what you think? That I'm so desperate I'll take whatever scraps of belonging you throw my way? I think you're a good woman who deserves better than being the subject of small-town gossip. I think you deserve a real husband, a real home, a real future. And you think you can't give me those things? Samuel's silence was confirmation. Margaret wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron, her movements sharp with barely contained emotion. You know what, Samuel? You're right about one thing. I do deserve better. I deserve better than a man so afraid of living again that he'd rather send away someone who cares about him and his daughter than risk feeling something real. Samuel's face went white. Margaret, no. She held up a hand. You want me to leave? Fine. I'll pack my things. But don't pretend it's for my sake. It's because you're terrified that you might actually be happy again, and that feels like betraying Sarah's memory. She moved toward the door, but Samuel's voice stopped her. You don't know what you're talking about. Margaret turned back, tears burning her eyes but her voice steady. Don't I? I've watched you, Samuel. I've seen how you flinch every time Lucy calls me Mama Margaret when she's half asleep. I've seen how you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. And I've seen how quickly you pull back every time there's a moment of real connection between us. Margaret, please! I'm not asking you to forget Sarah. I'm not asking you to stop loving her. I'm just asking you to consider that maybe, just maybe, she'd want you and Lucy to be happy again. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the mantel clock and Lucy's distant chatter outside. Samuel's hands gripped the edge of the counter so tightly his knuckles had gone white. You want to know what Sarah would want? He said finally, his voice rough. She'd want me to protect our daughter from getting attached to someone who might leave. She'd want me to be careful with Lucy's heart because it's already been broken once. And what about your heart? The question hung in the air between them. Samuel's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Margaret saw past all his careful defenses to the raw grief and longing beneath. I don't get to have once anymore, he whispered. I had my chance at happiness, and I lost it. Now I just survive, and I make sure Lucy survives, and that's enough. Is it? Margaret stepped closer. Is it really enough? Because from where I stand, you're not surviving, Samuel. You're just existing. There's a difference. Before he could respond, the kitchen door burst open and Lucy bounded in, her cheeks pink with fresh air and exercise. Margaret, Papa, look how many eggs I found. She held up a basket filled with brown eggs, her face bright with accomplishment. Mrs. Clucky laid 3 today, and Henrietta laid 2, and… She stopped, looking between the 2 adults. Why do you both look sad? Margaret quickly wiped her eyes and forced a smile. We're not sad, sweetheart. We're just talking about grown-up things. Lucy's expression grew serious. Are you going away? The question pierced the tension in the room. Margaret looked at Samuel, waiting for him to answer his daughter's question. We're discussing it, he said finally. Lucy's face crumpled. But I don't want her to go away. She makes the best biscuits, and she knows all the words to the song about the mockingbird, and she doesn't get mad when I ask too many questions. Lucy, Samuel began, and she smells like lavender soap, and she reads stories with different voices for all the characters. And when I had bad dreams about Mama going away, she told me that love doesn't go away even when people do. Margaret's throat tightened. She knelt down to Lucy's level. Oh, sweetheart. Please don't go, Lucy whispered, wrapping her arms around Margaret's neck. I love you. Margaret closed her eyes, holding the child tight, breathing in the scent of sunshine and innocence in her hair. When she opened them, she found Samuel watching them with an expression of such raw pain it nearly broke her heart. I love you too, Lucy, she whispered. So much. But love, Margaret was learning, wasn't always enough to make someone stay. That night after Lucy was asleep, Margaret sat on the porch steps looking up at the star-filled sky. The mountains loomed dark against the horizon, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. She heard footsteps behind her, but didn't turn around when Samuel sat down beside her on the steps. Beautiful night, he said quietly. It is. They sat in silence for a while, the space between them heavy with unspoken words. Sarah loved nights like this, Samuel said finally. She used to say the stars were God's way of reminding us that even in the darkest times, there was still light. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was. Samuel's voice was soft with memory. She would have liked you, I think, would have appreciated your strength, your kindness with Lucy. Margaret turned to look at him. But that's not enough, is it? Samuel met her eyes, and in the starlight, she could see the struggle written across his features. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I don't know how to care about someone again without feeling like I'm betraying the woman I promised to love forever. Margaret's heart ached for him, for the impossible situation he'd created for himself. Samuel, she said gently, loving someone new doesn't diminish what you had with Sarah. The heart doesn't have a limited capacity for love, doesn't it? His voice was barely a whisper. Because sometimes I'm so afraid that if I let myself care about you, I'll forget what it felt like to love her. And she's all I have left of her. Those memories, that love. Margaret reached over and took his hand, surprised when he didn't pull away. You have Lucy, she said simply. Sarah lives on in her every day, in her laugh, her curiosity, her capacity for love. You don't need to hold on to grief to hold on to Sarah. Samuel's thumb traced across her knuckles, the touch so gentle it made her breath catch. What if I disappoint you? He asked. What if I can't be what you need? What if you don't have to be anything but yourself? They sat there under the vast Colorado sky, hands intertwined, neither making promises they weren't sure they could keep. But for the first time since Margaret had arrived at the Carter Ranch, the silence between them felt like possibility instead of goodbye. The discovery came by accident, as most life-changing moments do. Margaret was cleaning the main bedroom, something that had been neglected since Sarah's death, when she found the loose floorboard. She'd been sweeping under the bed when her broom handle caught on what she thought was a nail, but proved to be the edge of a board that shifted under pressure. Curiosity overtook caution. Margaret pried up the board and found a small wooden box hidden beneath, wrapped in oiled cloth to protect it from moisture. Her hands trembled as she lifted it out. This was clearly something private, something Samuel had hidden away. She should have replaced the board and walked away, should have pretended she'd never found it. But something about the careful way it had been wrapped, the deliberate secrecy of its hiding place, made her fingers work at the cloth before her conscience could stop her. Inside the box were letters, dozens of them, all in Samuel's careful handwriting, all addressed to my dearest Sarah. The paper was yellowed at the edges, some pages stained with what might have been tears. Margaret's breath caught as she realized what she was looking at, letters to his dead wife. She started to close the box, knowing she had no right to read something so private. But one letter lay partially unfolded on top, and her eyes caught the first few lines before she could stop herself. My dearest Sarah, it's been 6 months now, and I still wake up reaching for you. Lucy asked me yesterday why I talk to your picture when I think she's sleeping. I didn't know what to tell her. How do you explain to a child that sometimes the dead feel more real than the living? Margaret's hands shook as she carefully refolded the letter. These weren't just messages to the dead. They were the desperate communications of a man trying to maintain connection with the only woman he'd ever loved. The raw pain in even those few lines made her chest ache with sympathy. She was replacing the board when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Margaret? Samuel's voice carried through the house. Are you upstairs? Coming, she called, quickly smoothing the rug over the hiding place. But her hands were still trembling when she reached the kitchen, and Samuel noticed immediately. You look pale. Are you feeling all right? Fine, she said quickly. Just tired. But Samuel's eyes were too sharp, and he'd lived with secrets long enough to recognize them in others. His gaze moved past her toward the stairs, then back to her face. Were you in my room? The question was asked quietly, but Margaret heard the underlying tension. I was cleaning. I thought... She stopped, meeting his eyes. I found something I shouldn't have. Samuel went very still. What did you find? Margaret's throat felt dry. A box, under the floorboards. I didn't read much, I swear. Just a few lines before I realized. You had no right. Samuel's voice was low, controlled, but she could see the fury building behind his careful exterior. I know, I'm sorry. I was just cleaning, and the board was loose. And you decided to pry into something that wasn't yours. Samuel stepped closer, his eyes hard as flint. Those letters are private, sacred. Samuel, please, did you read them? All of them? No, just the beginning of one, and then I stopped. I put everything back. Get out. The words were spoken quietly, but they hit Margaret like a physical blow. Samuel, get out of my house, now. Margaret felt tears burning her eyes, but she kept her voice steady. Let me explain. There's nothing to explain. You violated my privacy, my trust, my... His voice cracked slightly. Those letters are all I have left of her. The only way I can still talk to her, still feel connected to, I know, Margaret whispered. I could see that. The love in them. The pain. I stopped reading the moment I understood. Samuel turned away from her, his shoulders rigid. It doesn't matter. You shouldn't have. You're right. I shouldn't have. But Samuel, those letters. She took a careful step closer. You're torturing yourself. That's not your concern, isn't it? When it affects Lucy, when she watches you talk to pictures and write to ghosts instead of living in the world with her. Samuel spun around, his face white with anger. Don't you dare bring my daughter into this. Don't you dare presume to tell me how to grieve or how to father. I'm not presuming anything. I'm just saying that Sarah is gone, and you're still here, and Lucy needs a father who's present, not one who's spending all his emotional energy on the dead. The silence that followed was deafening. Samuel stared at her as if she'd slapped him. How dare you, he whispered. How dare you stand in my house in the room where she died and tell me I need to let go of the woman I promised to love forever. Margaret felt her own anger rise to match his. I'm not telling you to let go of her. I'm telling you to let go of the guilt that's keeping you from living. You know nothing about my guilt, don't I? Margaret stepped closer, her voice gaining strength. You feel guilty because you're attracted to me. You feel guilty because sometimes you forget to think about Sarah for hours at a time. You feel guilty because Lucy is bonding with me. And part of you wants that, wants us to be a family, and it feels like betraying Sarah's memory. Samuel's face went through a series of expressions: shock, denial, and finally raw vulnerability. Stop, he said, but his voice had lost its anger. You think loving someone new means loving Sarah less. But that's not how love works, Samuel. The heart doesn't have a limited capacity. Loving me, if that's what you want, doesn't diminish what you felt for her. You don't understand, Samuel said, his voice breaking. I promised her I'd never love anyone else. On her deathbed when she was dying, I held her hand and promised that she was it for me, that no one would ever take her place. Margaret's anger dissolved instantly, replaced by deep sadness for both of them. Oh, Samuel. She was scared, he continued, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks. Scared of leaving Lucy, scared of leaving me. And I thought if I promised her she'd always be the only one, it would give her peace. But now you feel trapped by a promise made in grief to a dying woman who probably just needed to know she was loved. Samuel sank into a kitchen chair, his head in his hands. I write to her every week. I tell her about Lucy, about the ranch, about... He looked up at Margaret with anguished eyes. About you. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. What do you tell her about me? Margaret asked gently. Samuel's laugh was hollow. That I don't know what to do. That I care about you in ways I promised I never would again. That Lucy loves you, and part of me is grateful for that, and part of me is terrified. Margaret sat down across from him, close enough to touch but not touching. What do you think she would say back if she could? I don't know anymore. Samuel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I thought I knew. I thought she'd want me to stay faithful to her memory forever. But lately, he trailed off. Lately I wonder if she'd be angry that I'm wasting the life she died trying to give me. She fought so hard to live, fought to stay with us. And here I am, barely existing, writing letters to a ghost while a flesh and blood woman who cares about my daughter sleeps down the hall. Margaret reached across the table and took his hand. This time he didn't pull away. Samuel, what if that promise you made? What if it was never meant to be kept forever? What if it was just meant to help her let go peacefully, knowing she was loved? But what if it wasn't? What if breaking it means I never really loved her at all? Margaret squeezed his hand. Do you think I love my parents less because I came to care about my aunt? Do you think Lucy loves Sarah less because she's learning to love me? Samuel was quiet for a long moment. It's different. Is it? Or is it just scarier because romantic love feels more exclusive? I don't know how to do this, Samuel admitted. I don't know how to care about you without feeling like I'm betraying her. I don't know how to let myself be happy again. Maybe you don't have to figure it all out at once. Maybe you just have to decide whether you want to try. Samuel studied her face in the lamplight. And if I can't, if I try and fail, if the guilt is too strong, then at least you'll have tried. At least Lucy will have seen her father choose life over death, hope over fear. And what about you? What if I break your heart in the process? Margaret's smile was sad, but genuine. Hearts heal, Samuel. They're stronger than we think. And besides, she squeezed his hand again. You're worth the risk. Samuel stared down at their joined hands for a long time. When he looked up, something had shifted in his expression. Not resolution exactly, but possibility. I'd like to show you something, he said quietly. He led her back upstairs, back to the bedroom where she'd made her discovery. Without hesitation, he pried up the loose board and retrieved the box. These are 3 years of letters, he said, settling beside her on the edge of the bed. 3 years of talking to someone who can't talk back. 3 years of asking questions that will never be answered. He opened the box and withdrew a letter from the bottom, one of the oldest by the look of the yellowed paper. This was the first one I wrote, a week after the funeral. He handed it to Margaret. Read it. Margaret hesitated. Are you sure? Read it. With trembling fingers, Margaret unfolded the letter. Samuel's handwriting was shaky, clearly written in the depths of grief. My dearest Sarah, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to breathe without you. How to wake up each morning knowing you're not coming back. Lucy keeps asking when you're coming home, and I keep lying to her because I don't have the strength to watch her heart break the way mine has. I promise you, I will never love anyone else. You were it for me, my beginning and my end. I will raise our daughter to know how much you loved her, and I will never let anyone take your place. I'm lost without you, my darling, completely and utterly lost. All my love, Samuel. Margaret wiped away tears as she finished reading. Samuel, now read this one. He handed her another letter, this one much more recent. I wrote it last week. My dearest Sarah, there's a woman here now. Her name is Margaret, and Lucy loves her. She makes our daughter laugh in ways she hasn't since you died, and she's brought light back into this house. I think you'd like her. She's kind and strong, and she sees Lucy the way you always did, as something precious and wonderful. I don't know what to do about how I feel. I promised you I'd never love anyone else, but I'm starting to think maybe love isn't something we can promise away. Maybe it just happens whether we want it to or not. I hope you can forgive me for what I'm thinking, for what I might be about to do. I hope you understand that loving someone new doesn't mean I loved you less. Lucy needs a mother, and I think I might need Margaret too. Help me know what's right, my darling. Help me find the courage to let go without letting go, to love again without forgetting. All my love, always. Samuel. Margaret set the letter down with trembling hands. You wrote this about me? Samuel nodded. And every night since, I've waited for some sign from Sarah, some indication of what she'd want me to do. And Samuel's smile was small but genuine. Tonight, watching you with that first letter, seeing how you cried for my pain even when I was angry with you, I think I got my answer. Margaret held her breath. What was it? That Sarah would want me to stop writing to the dead and start living with the living. That she'd want Lucy to have a mother who chooses to be here, not one she has to share with a ghost. Samuel reached into the box and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. I'd like to write one more letter, a goodbye. Margaret watched as he wrote. My dearest Sarah, this is my last letter to you, my love. Not because I'm forgetting you, but because I'm finally ready to live again. Margaret is here now and she loves Lucy, and I think I might be falling in love with her. I hope that doesn't hurt you. I hope you understand that my heart is big enough for both of you, to cherish what we had and embrace what might be. Thank you for Lucy. Thank you for the years we had. Thank you for loving me enough to let me go. Watch over us, my darling, and know that you will always be Lucy's first mother and my first love. Until we meet again, Samuel. He folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box with the others. Then he looked at Margaret with eyes that held hope instead of just sorrow. I'm not ready to make promises yet, he said honestly, but I'm ready to try. If you're willing to be patient with a man who's still learning how to live again, Margaret reached up and touched his face, her thumb tracing the path of a tear he'd missed. "I'm willing to try too," she whispered, and for the first time since she'd arrived at the Carter Ranch, the future felt like something worth believing in. 2 weeks later, Margaret woke to the sound of raised voices drifting up from the town road. She dressed quickly and stepped onto the porch to find a small crowd gathered near the ranch gate. Mrs. Henderson was at the center, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Living in sin, plain as day. That child seeing such behavior, learning that decent women—" "Helen, that's enough." Dr. Henley's voice cut through the chatter. "What goes on at the Carter place is Samuel's business. It's the whole town's business when he's setting such an example for the children. My granddaughter plays with Lucy sometimes, and I won't have her exposed to—" Margaret stepped back inside, her cheeks burning. Through the kitchen window, she could see Samuel striding toward the gate, his posture rigid with anger. Whatever he said to the crowd was too quiet to hear, but they dispersed quickly enough. When he came back to the house, his face was dark as a storm cloud. "What did they want?" Margaret asked, though she already knew. "What they always want, to mind other people's business." Samuel poured himself coffee with sharp, angry movements. "Helen Henderson has decided you're a corrupting influence on Lucy." Margaret's stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" "She's threatening to talk to the territorial judge about Lucy's living situation. Says a child shouldn't be exposed to—" Samuel's jaw worked. "To unmarried adults living together." The words hit Margaret like cold water. She sank into a chair, suddenly understanding the full implications. They could take Lucy away. "Over my dead body." Samuel's voice was fierce, but Margaret heard the fear beneath it. "Samuel, maybe I should." "Don't." He turned to face her. "Don't say you should leave. Don't give them that victory." But Margaret was already thinking, already calculating. Lucy's happiness and safety meant more than her own desires. The child had already lost one mother. She couldn't be the cause of losing her father too. "What if they're right?" she said quietly. "What if my being here is putting Lucy at risk?" "The only thing putting Lucy at risk is small-minded people with too much time on their hands." Margaret stood and walked to the window, looking out toward the mountains. "I should go to Denver. Find work there, like you suggested." "Margaret, it would solve everything. Lucy would be safe, you wouldn't have to deal with the gossip, and I could build a real life somewhere." Samuel was quiet for so long that Margaret turned to look at him. His face had gone pale. "Is that what you want? To leave?" Margaret's heart ached at the question. "What I want doesn't matter. What matters is what's best for Lucy." "And you think abandoning her is what's best?" The accusation stung. "I'm not abandoning her. I'm protecting her." "By leaving without explanation? By running away the moment things get difficult?" Margaret felt her temper flare. "This isn't about running away. This is about facing reality. I'm not her mother, Samuel. I'm not your wife. I'm just a woman who's been taking advantage of your hospitality for weeks." "Is that really how you see it?" "How else should I see it? You said yourself you can't make promises. You're still writing letters to a dead woman, still wearing your wedding ring, still—" "I burned the letters." Margaret stopped mid-sentence. "What?" "Last night, after you went to sleep, I took them all out to the fire pit and burned them. Everyone." Samuel's voice was steady, but his eyes held something raw and vulnerable. "Including the box they were in." Margaret stared at him. "Why?" "Because I realized I'd been using them as an excuse to stay stuck in the past, an excuse not to take risks, an excuse not to fight for what I want." "And what do you want?" Samuel crossed the room and took her hands. "I want you to stay. I want you to marry me. I want Lucy to have the mother she already thinks you are, and I want to stop being afraid of being happy again." Margaret's breath caught. "Samuel, I know it's not romantic. I know you deserve better than a proposal born out of fear of losing you. But I love you, Margaret. I love the way you sing to Lucy when you think no one's listening. I love how you argue with me when you think I'm being foolish. I love that you see past my grief to the man I could be again." Tears burned Margaret's eyes. "I love you too. But loving each other doesn't change the situation. The town will still talk. Mrs. Henderson will still... Let them talk. Let them all talk. I'm tired of living my life according to other people's opinions. Margaret wanted to say yes. Every fiber of her being wanted to throw herself into his arms and accept his proposal. But the fear was too strong. What if they take Lucy away? What if the judge decides, then we'll fight it, together? And if we lose? Samuel's face grew grim. We won't lose. I won't let them take my daughter. Margaret pulled her hands free and stepped back. You can't guarantee that, and I won't be the reason Lucy loses her father. Margaret, please. I've made up my mind. The words came out stronger than she felt. I'll leave tomorrow. There's a train to Denver in the afternoon. Samuel stared at her as if she'd slapped him. Just like that? You're giving up on us? I'm saving us, all of us. By breaking Lucy's heart? By breaking mine? Margaret had to look away from the pain in his eyes. Hearts heal. Do they? Because mine hasn't healed from Sarah's death, and now you want to break it all over again. The comparison to his dead wife hit like a physical blow. That's not fair. Fair? Samuel's voice rose. What's fair about any of this? What's fair about finally finding someone who makes me want to live again, only to have her run away the moment things get difficult? Before Margaret could respond, Lucy's voice came from the stairway. Why are you yelling? Both adults turned to see the little girl standing at the bottom of the stairs, still in her nightgown, her eyes wide with worry. We're just talking, sweetheart, Margaret said, forcing her voice to be calm. Talking loud, Lucy observed. She looked between them with the sharp perception of a child who'd learned to read adult emotions. Are you fighting about me? Margaret and Samuel exchanged glances. Not about you, Samuel said carefully. Never about you. Lucy patted across the kitchen and climbed into Margaret's lap with the easy trust that made Margaret's heart ache. Mrs. Henderson said mean things about you yesterday, Lucy said, wrapping her arms around Margaret's neck. She said you were a bad lady who was going to ruin our family. Margaret's throat tightened. What did you tell her? I told her she was wrong. I told her you were the best lady in the whole world, and that you made Papa smile, and that you were my almost mama. Your almost mama? Lucy nodded solemnly. Because you take care of me like a mama, and you love me like a mama. But you're not married to Papa, so you can't be my real mama yet. The innocence of it broke Margaret's heart. She looked up to find Samuel watching them with an expression of such longing, it took her breath away. Lucy, Margaret said carefully, what would you think if I had to go away for a while? The child went very still. Go away where? To Denver, to find work. But why? How did you explain adult fears to a 6-year-old? How did you make a child understand that sometimes love wasn't enough? Some people in town think it's not right for me to live here with you and your papa when we're not married. Lucy frowned. Then why don't you get married? The simple question hung in the air. Samuel leaned forward. That's what I asked her, Lucy. But Margaret seems to think... I think it's more complicated than that, Margaret interrupted. Why? Lucy's eyes were serious, intent. Do you love Papa? Margaret's cheeks warmed. Yes. And Papa, do you love Margaret? Yes, Samuel said without hesitation. Then why don't you get married? That's what people do when they love each other. Because sometimes love isn't enough, Margaret said softly. Sometimes there are other things to consider. Lucy was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then she looked up at Margaret with those bright, serious eyes. Are you going to leave like Mama did? The question was asked so quietly, Margaret almost didn't hear it. But the fear behind it was unmistakable. Oh, sweetheart, no. It's not like that at all. I'm not sick. I'm not going to heaven. But you're going away and not coming back. Margaret's throat closed. She looked helplessly at Samuel, who was watching his daughter's face with growing alarm. Lucy, he said gently, Margaret cares about you very much. If she goes away, it's because she thinks it's what's best for you. But it's not. Lucy's voice rose, tears starting to spill down her cheeks. She's the best thing that ever happened to us. She makes you happy, and she sings to me, and she knows how to braid hair, And she doesn't get scared when there's thunder. Margaret felt her own tears starting. Lucy, please don't go. Lucy clutched Margaret's dress with small, desperate fists. I'll be good, I promise. I won't ask too many questions, or talk too much, or get mud on my dress. Please, please don't leave me. The words shattered something inside Margaret's chest. She pulled Lucy closer, breathing in the familiar scent of the child's hair. Oh, my darling girl, this has nothing to do with you being good. You're perfect exactly as you are. Then stay. Lucy pulled back to look at her. If I'm perfect and you love me, then stay. Margaret looked across the kitchen at Samuel, who was watching them with an expression of raw pain. It's not that simple, sweetheart. Yes, it is, Lucy's voice cracked with emotion. Grown-ups always say things are complicated, but they're not. If you love someone, you stay with them. If you don't, you go away. So which is it? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Margaret felt the weight of it, the simple truth that cut through all her fears and rationalizations. She loved them. She loved Lucy with the fierce protectiveness of a mother, and she loved Samuel with the deep, abiding love of a woman who'd found her other half. The question was whether that love was stronger than her fear. Before she could answer, the sound of thunder rolled across the sky. All three of them looked toward the windows, where dark clouds were gathering with ominous speed. Storm's coming, Samuel said, but his eyes never left Margaret's face. As if summoned by his words, the first drops of rain began to patter against the glass. Within minutes, it had become a downpour, and the wind was howling around the house with a fury that made the windows rattle. I should check the animal, Samuel said, reaching for his rain slicker. I'll help, Margaret said, settling Lucy in a chair. You stay inside, sweetheart. We'll be right back. But as they stepped onto the porch, a flash of lightning illuminated the sky, followed immediately by a crack of thunder so loud it shook the ground. In the distance, Margaret could see an orange glow that had nothing to do with sunset. Fire, Samuel breathed. The lightning must have struck something. The glow was coming from the direction of the Henley farm, but as they watched, the wind carried sparks toward the Carter property. Margaret could see embers landing in the dry grass near the barn. The animals, she shouted over the wind. Without thinking, she ran toward the barn, her skirts whipping around her legs. Behind her, she heard Samuel shouting her name, but the wind snatched his words away. The barn was filled with smoke when she reached it, but no flames yet. The horses were screaming with terror, and the cattle were bellowing in panic. Margaret fought her way through the smoke to the nearest stall. Easy, boy, she whispered to Samuel's gelding as she fumbled with the latch. We're getting you out of here. One by one, she released the animals, slapping them toward the open doors where Samuel was waiting to guide them to safety. The smoke was getting thicker, making her eyes stream and her lungs burn. She was releasing the last cow when she heard it, a deep, ominous creaking from above. She looked up to see flames licking at the roof beams. Margaret! Samuel's voice came from the doorway. Get out of there! Now! She turned toward his voice, but the smoke was so thick she could barely see. Her foot caught in something, a rope or piece of tack, and she went down hard, her head striking the edge of a feed bin. The world went gray around the edges. She could hear Samuel calling her name, could feel the heat of the flames growing closer, but her body wouldn't respond to her commands. Then strong arms were around her, lifting her, carrying her toward the light and air and safety. Samuel's voice was in her ear, rough with panic and smoke. I've got you! I've got you! Stay with me! They collapsed together on the wet grass, a safe distance from the barn, both of them coughing and gasping. Margaret's head throbbed where she'd hit it, but she was alive, and Samuel's arms were around her, and that was enough. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the storm-dark sky. But the rain was falling harder, and Samuel had managed to create fire breaks around the other buildings. The house was safe. The animals were safe. They were safe. You could have been killed, Samuel said, his voice shaking. When I saw you go down in there, when I thought... But I didn't, Margaret said, touching his face with trembling fingers. I'm right here. Don't ever scare me like that again. Then don't give me reasons to run into burning buildings for you. Samuel's laugh was shaky but real. Is that a yes? Margaret looked up at him through the rain and smoke. At this man who had just risked his life to save hers, who loved her daughter as his own, who was offering her everything she'd ever wanted. "That's a yes," she whispered. And as Samuel's lips found hers in the rain, Margaret finally understood that sometimes the greatest courage wasn't in running away from something. It was in running toward it, even when the path was uncertain and the risks were real, even when you might get burned. The morning after the storm dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself had been washed clean by the rain and fire. Margaret woke to the sound of hammering and found Samuel already at work, framing a new barn with lumber borrowed from neighbors who had appeared at daybreak without being asked. "Word travels fast," Samuel explained when Margaret brought him coffee. "Fire's everyone's enemy out here. When one ranch burns, the whole community feels it." Even Mrs. Henderson was there, though she kept her distance from Margaret, directing her grandsons and hauling boards with pointed efficiency. Dr. Henley worked alongside Samuel, his sleeves rolled up despite his age, and the blacksmith had brought his sons to help with the heavy lifting. It was Lucy who broke the careful peace. "Papa's going to marry Margaret," she announced to anyone who would listen, her voice carrying clearly across the worksite. "They kissed in the rain, and now we're going to be a real family." The hammering stopped. Conversation died. Every head turned toward Margaret and Samuel, who stood frozen with matching expressions of mortification. Mrs. Henderson's mouth pinched into a tight line. "Is that so?" Samuel straightened, setting down his hammer. His voice carried clearly in the sudden silence. "Yes, it is. Margaret has agreed to be my wife." The announcement rippled through the crowd like a stone thrown in still water. Some faces showed approval, others surprise, and a few, Mrs. Henderson's among them, showed barely concealed disapproval. "Well," Dr. Henley said finally, wiping sweat from his forehead, "I suppose congratulations are in order." He raised his water jug. "To the bride and groom." The toast was echoed by most of the men, though Margaret noticed several of the women remained conspicuously silent. Mrs. Henderson gathered her grandsons and left without another word. "You don't have to do this because of what people think," Margaret said quietly when they had a moment alone. Samuel's answer was to take her hand and slide something onto her ring finger. She looked down to see a simple band carved from wood, oak by the look of it, polished, smooth and warm from his pocket. "Where did you get this?" "Made it. Last night while you were sleeping." Samuel's cheeks reddened slightly. "I know it's not much. No gold or jewels. It's perfect." Margaret turned the ring on her finger, marveling at the careful craftsmanship. "But Samuel, are you sure?" "Really sure. Because once we do this, there's no going back. I've been sure since the moment I pulled you out of that barn. Maybe before that." Samuel's voice was steady, certain. "I love you, Margaret. I want to marry you, raise Lucy with you, maybe have more children if we're blessed. I want to grow old with you on this ranch. And if people talk, if they never accept us, then they'll talk, but they'll be talking about a married couple, which makes it harder for them to cause real trouble." Margaret smiled at the practical reasoning, so like Samuel to think in terms of solutions rather than problems. "When?" "As soon as possible. Tomorrow if Pastor Williams will have us." The next 24 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Margaret had no proper wedding dress, but Mrs. Patterson, the seamstress, appeared at the door with yards of blue silk. "Had this ordered for a client who never paid," she said briskly, not meeting Margaret's eyes directly, but not unkind. "Shame to let it go to waste." Lucy appointed herself as a wedding coordinator, directing everyone with the solemn importance of a child given an important task. She picked wildflowers for Margaret's bouquet, polished Samuel's boots, and pestered anyone within earshot about details. "Mama would have liked this," she told Margaret as they worked together on the simple altar arrangement. "She always said Papa deserved to be happy." "Did she?" Margaret paused in her flower arranging. "What else did she say about your papa?" Lucy considered this seriously. "She said he had the biggest heart in Colorado territory, but sometimes he forgot to use it on himself. She made me promise to remind him to be happy after she went to heaven." Margaret's throat tightened. "And have you reminded him?" "I tried, but I don't think he listened until you came." Lucy looked up at Margaret with those bright, serious eyes. "I think you're Mama's gift to us. a way to keep her promise even though she can't be here. The simple faith of it nearly undid Margaret. She pulled Lucy into a fierce hug, breathing in the scent of sunshine and innocence in her hair. "I love you so much, little one." "I love you too, Mama Margaret." The word hung between them, precious and fragile. Lucy had never called her that before, not directly. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure? Are you sure that's what you want to call me?" Lucy nodded solemnly. "You're going to be my mama now, and I want to be your little girl, if that's all right." "More than all right," Margaret whispered. "It's everything I ever wanted." The wedding took place the next evening at sunset, in the parlor of the Carter Ranch house. Pastor Williams performed the ceremony with quiet dignity, while a small gathering of neighbors bore witness. Dr. Henley stood as Samuel's best man, and Lucy served as Margaret's maid of honor, taking her duties with utmost seriousness. Margaret wore the blue silk dress that fit as if it had been made for her hair crowned with the wildflowers Lucy had woven into a simple circlet. Samuel had borrowed a suit from Dr. Henley, and though it was slightly too large, he looked handsome and nervous and utterly sincere. When the pastor asked if anyone had objections to the union, Margaret held her breath. But the silence held, and the ceremony continued. "Do you, Samuel James Carter, take Margaret Rose Sullivan to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer and poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do." Samuel's voice was strong, certain. "And do you, Margaret Rose Sullivan, take Samuel James Carter to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer and poorer, as long as you both shall live?" Margaret looked into Samuel's eyes and saw their future there. Quiet mornings over coffee, Lucy's laughter filling the house, perhaps other children to love and raise. She saw arguments and reconciliations, hard times and good times. The ordinary, miraculous life of two people choosing each other day after day. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you husband and wife. Samuel, you may kiss your bride." Samuel's kiss was gentle, reverent, full of promise. Around them, their small congregation erupted in applause. But Margaret heard only the beating of her own heart and Lucy's delighted giggle. "We're a family now," Lucy announced to the room. "A real family." The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. Mrs. Patterson had made a cake, Dr. Henley produced a bottle of champagne, and even some of the women who had been cool to Margaret offered quiet congratulations. As the evening wound down and the guests departed, Margaret found herself alone with her new family. Lucy had fallen asleep in Samuel's arms, worn out by excitement, and Margaret watched as he carried her to bed with infinite tenderness. "She was so happy today," he said when he returned, pulling Margaret into his arms. "We all were." They stood together in the lamplight of their parlor, swaying slightly to music only they could hear. Outside, night sounds drifted through the open windows. The call of an owl, the rustle of wind in the trees, the distant lowing of cattle. "Any regrets?" Samuel asked softly. Margaret pretended to consider. "Well, I did come to Colorado looking for a husband. And I got so much more than I bargained for." Samuel's smile was soft, content. "What did you get?" "A home, a daughter, a man who sees me, really sees me, and loves me anyway." Margaret reached up to touch his face. "A second chance at everything I thought I'd lost forever." "I'm the one who got the second chance," Samuel said. "I was dead inside, Margaret, going through the motions of living, but not really alive. You brought me back. We brought each other back." They made their way upstairs together, checking on Lucy one last time before retiring to their own room. Their room now, no longer just Samuel's. Margaret had moved her few possessions from the guest room that morning, a simple act that somehow made everything real. Samuel was surprisingly shy as they prepared for bed, this man who had faced down storms and fires and grief. Margaret found his nervousness endearing. "Second thoughts?" she teased gently. "Number just. It's been a long time since I shared this room with someone. I want to do right by you." Margaret moved to him, placing her hands on his chest. Samuel, we have the rest of our lives to figure this out. Tonight doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be ours. He covered her hands with his own. I love you, Mrs. Carter. I love you too, Mr. Carter. Later, as they lay together in the darkness, Margaret thought about the journey that had brought her here. The fake letter that had seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning. The 5 days of waiting at the station hadn't been wasted time. They had been preparation, stripping away her old expectations to make room for something better than she had ever imagined. Samuel, she whispered. Thank you. For what? For seeing past the desperate woman at the train station. For letting Lucy bring me home. For giving me a chance to prove I belonged here. Samuel's arm tightened around her. You never had to prove anything. You belonged here from the moment you walked through our door. Even when I found your letters. Especially then. That's when I knew you were strong enough to handle my past, honest enough to call me on my mistakes, and brave enough to fight for our future. Margaret smiled in the darkness. What do you think tomorrow will bring? Lucy will wake us up at dawn asking for pancakes. The new barn won't build itself. Mrs. Henderson will probably find something new to disapprove of. Sounds perfect. Does it? Samuel, I spent years waiting for my real life to begin. Waiting for the right opportunity, the right man, the right moment. But I was looking at it all wrong. Life isn't something that happens to you. It's something you choose day after day, moment by moment. She turned in his arms to face him. I choose this. I choose you. Choose Lucy. Choose this ranch and this community and whatever challenges come with all of it. I choose to stop waiting and start living. Samuel's kiss was answer enough. 1 year later, Margaret stood in the same spot where she had waited at the train station, but this time she wasn't alone. Lucy held her hand while Samuel bounced their 3-month-old son, James, against his shoulder. Mama, tell me the story again, Lucy demanded, about how you waited for Papa. Margaret smiled, settling her skirts as she sat on the bench. Well, I waited 5 days at this very station. For a man who didn't exist, Lucy chimed in, delighted by this part of the story. That's right, for a man who didn't exist. But sometimes the best things come when we're not looking for them. Like Pop and me? Exactly like Pop and you. They were waiting for the train to arrive with Dr. Henley's new nurse, a young woman from back east who would help with the growing medical needs of the community. Margaret had volunteered to meet her, understanding what it felt like to step off a train in an unfamiliar place with nothing but hope and determination. Think she'll be scared? Lucy asked. Probably, but we'll take good care of her, won't we? Just like you took care of us, Samuel said, settling beside them on the bench. The train whistle sounded in the distance, and Margaret felt the familiar flutter of anticipation. But this time, it wasn't anxiety about her own future. It was excitement about welcoming someone new to their community, their family extending to embrace another soul in need of belonging. Here it comes, Lucy said, bouncing with excitement. Margaret squeezed her daughter's hand and smiled at her husband. Here it comes indeed. As the train pulled into the station, Margaret thought about letters that had never existed, promises that had been meant to be broken, and the strange, perfect way that life had of bringing people together just when they needed each other most. She was no longer waiting. She was home. Margaret Sullivan waited 5 days at a train station for a man who never existed. What she found instead was a love that was more real than any promise written on paper, a daughter who needed her as much as she needed them, and a home that chose her back. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as disappointments. Sometimes the letter that breaks your heart is actually leading you toward the life you were meant to live. And sometimes waiting isn't about the destination. It's about becoming the person ready to recognize home when you finally find it. Margaret's story reminds us that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing love despite the fear, staying despite the uncertainty, and fighting for belonging even when the world tells you to give up. She didn't just find a husband in Samuel Carter. She found a man willing to heal alongside her, to build something new from the ashes of what was lost. And Lucy? Lucy teaches us that children see truth more clearly than adults sometimes do. They understand that families aren't just born, they're chosen, nurtured, and built one small act of love at a time. Her simple question, "Why don't you get married?" cut through all the complicated fears and reminded two wounded hearts that love, at its core, is beautifully simple. The American frontier was harsh, unforgiving, and often cruel to those who didn't fit its narrow definitions of acceptable. But it was also a place where people could reinvent themselves, where a mail-order bride could become a beloved wife and mother, where a grieving widower could learn to love again, and where a little girl's wisdom could heal two broken hearts. This is the magic of the Wild West, not just the dramatic shootouts and cattle drives that fill our movies, but the quiet heroism of ordinary people choosing extraordinary love. The courage of women who traveled thousands of miles for the chance at happiness. The strength of men learning to trust again after devastating loss. The resilience of children growing up in a world where survival and tenderness had to exist side by side. Margaret's journey from that train station bench to the altar of the Carter Ranch reminds us that sometimes the best love stories begin with the worst disappointments. That sometimes we have to lose our original plan to find our true purpose. And that home isn't a place you arrive at. It's a choice you make every day with the people who see your heart and choose to stay. In a world that often feels uncertain and disconnected, stories like these remind us of love's enduring power to transform not just individuals, but entire communities. Margaret didn't just marry Samuel, she became part of Silver Point, Colorado, contributing her strength to a growing town that needed every kind of courage it could find. She waited 5 days at the station, but she spent a lifetime proving that the best things are worth waiting for and worth fighting for once you find them. No one waits alone anymore at the Carter Ranch, and no one ever will. If you believe in second chances and slow-burn Western romance, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Stories. Every week, we bring you tales of courage, love, and redemption from the American frontier. Stories of ordinary people who chose extraordinary love against all odds. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story of frontier hearts finding their way home. Next week, she disguised herself as a man for 10 years until one kiss revealed everything. A tale of deception, danger, and a love that couldn't be hidden forever. Like this video, if Margaret's story touched your heart, share it with someone who believes in the power of second chances and tell us in the comments. What would you have done in Margaret's place? Would you have had the courage to stay and fight for love? Or would fear have sent you on the next train east? Until next time, remember, sometimes the best love stories begin with broken promises and end with unbreakable bonds. This is Wild West Stories, where every heart finds its home on the frontier.